Isn't it amazing in our lifetime, you know, the vocabulary we're developing and how we're stretching our concepts of quote-unquote reality. And the next speaker, Anyextee, is going to be talking to us about the Maya mystery schools. And he uses a phrase called cosmic universities. Isn't that a great, wouldn't you have loved to have gone to a cosmic university and learned some new school thinking? But that's what CPAK really is. So I have to jump on an airplane now. I'm off to Toronto. So I'll see you at the next CPAK or in the multiverse, right? We are only one. Amen.
We're just waiting to get the slide put on the screen. How's everyone doing this morning? Yeah. Why don't we all give a round of applause to Walter Cruttenden, his family, and his crew for this amazing platform. So this morning, we're going to be speaking about mystery schools, centers of mystic initiation that flourished throughout the ancient world, preserving timeless teachings that are no less valid yesterday than today. Among them, the Mithraic, the Delphic, the Orphic, the Pythagorean school, the Rosicrucian tradition, the Egyptian mysteries of Isis, Osiris, and the schools of Akhenaten are all but a few of the many mystery traditions which make up what we have come to know as the Western esoteric tradition. However, often overlooked or perhaps omitted from that list are the mystery schools of the Mesoamerican, which flourished right here in the Western Hemisphere centuries before the Renaissance and the European recognition and transmission of that esoteric tradition. So today, I would like to honor, commemorate, and celebrate the esoteric wisdom and sacred science of the ancient Maya mystery schools. I'll also be including some recent discoveries that I'll be publishing in my forthcoming book, tentatively titled Water Wizards, The Lost Music of the Maya, Cymatics, and the Kukulkan Degree of Consciousness, as well as guiding you through a practical application for interpreting what we call the intelligence of the heart. All this in 45 minutes or less. Let us get started, shall we? Since antiquity, humans have demonstrated unusual accomplishment, from the oldest temple-building cultures of Göbekli Tepe to the many mysteries that continue to elude us even until today. Among them, the mysteries of the Maya, who we know for their scientific, agricultural, and architectural achievements. The Maya left us their codices, their sacred books. In fact, they scribed thousands of these books. It's likely tens of thousands of these books until they were burned at the hands of Diego de Landa and their religious oppressors in the Yucatan. A heinous crime, an atrocity that parallels that to the library book burning at the Library of Alexandria in ancient Egypt. And though scholars consider that to be an apocryphal work, we know this certainly happened among the Maya. However, this does not negate Maya achievement, as we do have surviving pre-Hispanic documents. They also co-developed chocolate with the Olmec. Who doesn't love chocolate? They identified antibiotics, specifically penicillin, thousands of years before the European. They had their own numerical system, independently invented zero from independent of other cultures. They were considered naked eye astronomers, observing the sun, moon, Venus, and other planets. They had their own 360-day solar calendar, more accurate than our own. They even had their own day signs. This could be considered ancient wisdom for modern living. We could use it today, the practicality of this. It was like a daily manual for the Maya. And of course, they had the prototype for ball sports. The first ball game of the Americas was invented by the Maya. In fact, the scholars tell us that by 700 AD, Tikal not only had ball courts, hospitals, libraries, schools. And actually, I'm going to take it a step further today and say they had mystery schools. Complete philosophical, initiatic traditions with their own secret modalities of communication, which is not a far cry from what we find in the Masonic tradition, where brothers of the craft are sworn to secrecy under oath. And this is evidenced in the Chilam Balam, which we learn that the Maya actually underwent interrogations. In other words, they would have to answer a series of paradoxical riddles. They were esoteric questions that would seem overt, but if the initiate did not understand the proper context, it would be at the penalty of death. Of course, among the Freemasons, this is a figurative or symbolic death, whereas among the Maya, it was literal. But how are we, CPAK, as the interpreters of this long-dead language, to better understand it if we don't have the appropriate context? Well, I propose a case for what I like to call esoteric archaeology. And that is because I believe by examining ancient civilizations and the indigenous traditions which surround them through an esoteric lens, that we can, and that is the lens of the Western esoteric tradition, that we can begin to learn more, not only about who we are, but what we're truly capable of. And thus, consequently, develop a clearer picture for some of the many mysteries that continue to boggle the minds of our modern scientists today. Now, in esoteric circles, it has long been known that there is another science, a sacred science, one in which bypasses our cerebral intelligence and speaks directly to the intelligence of our heart. And I quote, "There is a sacred science, and for thousands of years, countless inquisitive people have sought in vain to penetrate its secrets." Such were the words of a man who should need no introduction before this sophisticated audience. However, we'll honor him with a brief one. French Hermeticist R.A. Schwaller de Lubitz, best known for his 15-year study in Egypt, where he examined the Luxor Temple of Man, which he dubbed the Temple of Man, because he found within it inherent the geometries and proportions that are within the human canon. They were inherent in the temple. We should all, by now, be familiar with his stepdaughter, Lucy Lammy's famous illustration of the male skeleton superimposed over the temple. It would seem as though Schwaller was in a constant state of revelation while working at the Luxor Temple, which enabled him to produce his doctrine of the anthropocosm. That is, the belief in the man cosmos, the sacred science, which is a complete philosophical, scientific, religious, and artistic doctrine. But had Schwaller not approached Egypt through an esoteric lens, he may not have arrived at some of the same insights that he received. You see, Schwaller had a long history in the esoteric tradition before he even stepped foot in Egypt. He himself had his own mystery school with his own disciples, and he taught techniques for interpreting this sacred science. Schwaller himself says, "It is only after having studied the most serious works on this strange subject, from Zosimos to the latest writing, that I place sacred text and myth in parallel to the development of what is called the Hermetic opus." The Hermetic opus. That is to say, the Hermetic work of the Hermetic mystery tradition, which thus gives way to the alchemical tradition. Schwaller's father was a chemist, he himself an operative alchemist who performed experiments alongside the great Fulcanelli, who allegedly took his work for the mysteries of the Gothic cathedral. He also painted with Matisse, whose mentor educated or inspired them to learn about this inner knowing. That is a knowing from the inside, an inner tradition. Schwaller was a bit of a prodigy. He actually lectured before the Theosophical Society at an early age and even produced a treatise on Pythagorean number mysticism. We've talked a lot about number at this conference. I myself first became aware of the importance of number while on the bus in Egypt from my mentor, our dear friend, the late, great John Anthony West, who we all know and love for his mystery of the Sphinx and water erosion theory. But what may not be well known about John, unless you've had the opportunity to spend a significant amount of time with him, is that he really had this expansive depth of knowledge when it came to the mystery schools, specifically the Hermetic tradition. He himself was actually a practitioner of the mystery school teachings of the Fourth Way, which were brought to the West by the great mystic George Ivanovich Gurdjieff, who also brought us the Enneagram, which is used today by CEOs and entrepreneurs in their business to better understand people, many of whom may not even realize its roots lie in antiquity. You see, Gurdjieff was also a proponent of the sacred science, though he knew it by another name. He himself had his own mystery school. It was called the Institute for what? Anyone? The Institute for the Harmonious Development of Man. The Harmonious Development of Man. And there he taught techniques for getting out of what he called the formatory mind and developing a more whole body awareness. Gurdjieff, like many of us, thought that the answers we seek could be found in these ancient civilizations and the indigenous traditions that surround them. In fact, he and his friends at an early age set out on a quest in search of that, objectively. And what he concluded is that if the wisdom of the East did not marry the energy of the West, that mankind, humankind rather, would be doomed. Or in his words, food for the moon. Now, certainly this master of the East experienced the energy of the West when he came to my hometown of Boston, Massachusetts, in the early 20th century to teach his own sacred science of Kriya Pranayama yoga meditation. Before traversing south of the border, where he was presented before the president of Mexico, sailed along Lake Chapala, and my favorite photo of Master Yogananda sitting in front of the Tenyuca Pyramid in central Mexico on the serpent balustrade, known to the Mexica, which scholars refer to as the Aztec, but let's honor them. The Mexica people know this principle as the principle of Quetzalcoatl, which the Maya know to be the principle of Kukulkan. Now, what Yogananda found in Mexico was a people that reminded him of his own back home. In fact, in the 1929 November issue of East Meets West magazine, Yogananda wrote about how the people of Mexico were, and I quote, spiritually inclined, unquote. What did he mean by that? What's the departure from the people back home where I live in Boston? Spiritually declined, what's the difference? Who were the people of the early 20th century that were living in Mexico? Well, they were the Mexica, Azteca, Tolteca, Perupecha, Tarascan, Olmeca, Maya. No, this is not a hip-hop rap, ladies and gentlemen. These were the descendants of the ancient Mesoamerican people. It's what the Harvard Divinity School, the Harvard School of Divinity professor David Carrasco would refer to as a convivencia. It was an amalgamation of the Spanish conquerors and the ancient people of Mexico. And many of the traditions were brought forth. They were deeply seated in their culture. They were encoded in their music, in their sacred dance, in their textiles. So I began to wonder, could we find a living mystery tradition that's surviving from ancient times in Mexico? And more importantly, if so, could we find a sacred science? Could we find what Schwaller found in Egypt among the people of Mexico? Or to use the words of John Anthony West, could we Schwallerize it? And so this is the work of Schwaller. It's been long established that the Egyptologists have known about the grid in which the 7 degrees of scribes would use to produce their hieroglyphs. Schwaller was able to identify the 18 by 19 grid, which is highly symbolic and requires an hour discourse. We don't have time to get into all of it today. But we know Schwaller for his work in Egypt, but what isn't well known is that he actually found the same among this famous Maya text. Now, this is the work of John Anthony West, and it was featured in his book, The Serpent in the Sky, where John also wrote about how many of those who have tried to establish a connection between the ancient people of Mesoamerica and the ancient Egyptians, inconclusively, though Jah felt that Schwaller's work lent weight to the hypothesis, and he himself felt like it called for further study. So this is where I pick up the torch and decided to carry on tradition in search of the sacred science among the Maya in Mexico. And I would like to invite each and every one of you to join me in Mexico, specifically in the Yucatan, as we embark on a quest in search of the sacred science among the Maya. And if you think this is a plug for one of my symbolist tours to the Yucatan, it is. Our first clue begins with the work of Tatiana Prashanacroft. Prior to her work, it was understood that the ceremonial complexes of the ancient Maya were, well, strictly ceremonial. Thankfully, her work was able to establish that the stone stelae at these structures were actually lists, names, names of kings and dates of ascension, essentially kings lists, no different than what we have in ancient Egypt. Let us take a look at the cartouche, which is derivative of the Shen ring, which is a circle that is stretched out and becomes the cartouche. And from that, we put the king's name or one of his several titles. For example, here we have the cartouche of Men Kephara, which is the cartouche of Tutmosis III, also a symbol of the Rosicrucian order Amorc, because it is Tutmosis III, which we know for his military campaigns, but the Rosicrucians teach that later in his life he had a spiritual reformation. In fact, he organized the mystery schools into a single order alongside Hatshepsut at the Temple of Karnak. Now, what's interesting is if we look at the stelae in the Yucatan, we have what's called what they call a celestial circle, again, to perpetuate the king for all immortality. This is the celestial circle, or in Egyptian terms, cartouche, for Ukitkan-Lektak, who was the holy lord of Ekbalam, which predates Chichen Itza in the Yucatan. Ukitkan-Lektak died a god, a semi-divine being. He was a holy king, a king of all kings. In other words, he was a fully initiated, realized, illuminated individual. And essentially what this is not a far cry from Schwaller's pharaonic theocracy. You see, it's the idea that the king is actually just a prototype for what we can all become. This is a promise and a message to each and every one of us, that we can achieve this higher state of consciousness, or I don't even like to use the term higher, but we can actually develop, we can speed up our own evolution in a single lifetime to become fully realized. And so where there are kings lists in the ancient world, there are kings. And where there are kings, there is this sacred science. This sacred science was taught and facilitated in the mystery schools. But what exactly is a mystery school? Well, we have the Rosicrucian tradition, which we know from the Fama Fraternitatis in 1614, that it was built upon the mystery schools of antiquity. And if we were to turn to the Rosicrucian order Amorc, they would define mystery schools as centers of study for students and initiates, where they would actually teach about natural principles and laws so that we could better become in harmony with them. They would also teach how to observe silence and engender within a feeling with the divine. This is best expressed in the Delphic mystery tradition at Delphi, at the Temple of Apollo, where above the portal is a lintel in which reads, "Know thyself." You see, it was all about conditioning the body, or conditioning ourselves to essentially become a vessel to receive the divine, to receive the cosmic. And so the word mystery, actually, Frater Christian Rebis, author of the Rosicrucian Histories and Mysteries, informs us that mystery schools were both monasteries and universities. And Peter Tompkins, author of the Mysteries of the Mexican Pyramid, which, by the way, serves as a blueprint for John Anthony West's textbook-style Serpent in the Sky. Peter Tompkins wrote a foreword for John. Mr. Tompkins would have it that the structures of Mesoamerica were actually considered cosmic universities, where man would not only go to learn about the metaphysical makeup of man and the matrix of reality, but learn about the cosmos. And so you see, the word mystery does not necessarily imply that something is mysterious. It implies that one is formally educated, initiated, to receive this specialized knowledge, this gnosis. The word mystery, the etymology of the word, actually goes back to the Greek mysterio, which is comprised of the Greek verb muo, which means to close, as in to close the ears if you're tired of the mainstream point of view, or to close the eyes, like when we meditate, or to close the mouth, as in secrecy. Tyria meant festival, and a leading authority on the Eleusinian mysteries, Karl Kerenier, informs us that Mysteria was the festival in which the secret was communicated. Now, I find this interesting because it is in ancient Egypt that the Freemasons, Rosicrucians, find the traditional timeline of the mystery schools. And it is in ancient Egypt that we find a number of these festivals. I mean, you can take your pick. We have the Opet Festival, the Hepsed Festival, which, if we consider the scholarly work of Jeremy Nadler, could be best viewed as an initiatory process where secret rites actually took place. You see, it provided an opportunity. This is typical temple architecture. Okay, we have our pylons, our colonnades, our courtyard, which is symbolic of the primordial swamp from which all creation rose. And it was the courtyard that provided the opportunity. It has been long known in Egyptology that only the high priest or the pharaoh himself could gain access to the temple's innermost sanctum, the Atidum, the Naus, or the inner chamber, the Holy of Holies. That would be right here in this example. But you see, the courtyard provided this opportunity for the general public to gain access to the temple. And it also provided an opportunity for initiates to petition, or candidates to petition to become initiates, where they would wait to receive instruction before crossing the threshold. In other words, they're going from the everyday, repetitive, mundane, profane world and crossing over into another world. That is the world of the sacred. And so the initiates would go through several degrees within the temple. We can take, for example, the temple of Dendera at Hathor, where upon entering it could be considered a planetarium or an observatory. The initiate would look at the ceiling and learn about various cycles. Daily cycles, weekly cycles, monthly cycles, yearly cycles, great year cycles, cycles of formlessness into form, cycles of spirit manifesting into matter. The cosmology is all there. Then they would proceed further into the temple, where they would further become acquainted with what we commonly refer to as gods, but are best viewed as netters, principles or aspects of nature and cosmological principles, before finally proceeding to the innermost sanctum, the Holy of Holies, where one would go inside to commune with the energies that were consecrated there. Robert Schoch has pointed out in the past how it's not necessarily the temple that was sacred, right? And of course, we know from the great work of the late, great John Burke, who actually took this stage, that these were very important centers. John Burke went around the world with his crew and his magnetometer to these ancient sacred sites and actually tested them. He put some science behind it. And of course, Rosicrucians of the 10th degree have long known that, you see, it's not the temple itself that was sacred. It's that they were built upon cosmotelluric zones where terrestrial forces converge with that of the cosmic. And so it was like a seed that would grow out in successive stages. It was the cosmology. And this was one of the major teachings in the mystery schools. But how are we to, what are some of the challenges for interpreting the mystery traditions among the Maya? Well, of course, we have our academic textbooks, which are written based on the prevailing academic theory of that day, and their authors who we have to consider their own limited understanding of the ancient world, as well as perhaps maybe their own Victorian upbringings. We have to widen our field of vision. You see, the Maya scholars still can't even decide on dates for certain structures. It's no different in Egypt. They're pushing dates back all the time. And the ball game, the Mesoamerican ball game, is a classic example where they can't decide if it's the winner or the loser in which has their head decapitated. The quackademics. That's a John word, by the way. And so, you know, the quackademics would have it that the ball game was actually played as a competitive sport to avoid physical sacrifice. But what if we were to look at it on a higher scale? Let's take on a shamanic perspective, where it's not the losing ball player being led to his physical death, but an initiatory drama, guiding the initiate through the process of becoming, from which they are able to connect with higher spiritual realities, and through the regenerative principle come back to heal. See, the Maya understood this. This here is actually, I'll show you guys, spend some time on this side. This here is actually a relief taken from Chichen Itza, which hosts the largest ball court in Mesoamerica. And if we look at the illustration here, we see that we have the decapitated ball player down on one knee. He has 7 protrusions. He has 2 groups of 3 serpents, each with a split tongue representing the dual principle. The 7th is the vegetation that extends. It's the regenerative principle. And here we actually see what looks similar to the Egyptian lotus. And even revisions need to be made in Egyptology. It's not an exact science. In fact, recent studies have shown how what Egyptologists have long considered to be an Egyptian lotus is actually no lotus at all. It's a water lily. And in fact, that water lily inspires potentially much of Egyptian art. You can refer to the work of John Meter and Barbara Demeter in 50 New Discoveries in Ancient Egypt to follow up on that. And then here you have these drips, which some consider blood, but it was the eats from which we get the word Chichen Itza. It was the cosmic essence which provides sustenance back for the gods, which give us sustenance, or we should say netters. And so here we have 2 ball players. They have their headgear, their regalia, their obsidian mirrors, which we placed on their back. This is thought to be an obsidian blade, and of course the decapitated head of the ball player. Notice the expression on his face. He doesn't look too upset as he's connecting with higher spiritual realities. Let me introduce you to Apuch, Lord of the Underworld. You can see the breath of life symbolizing the communication that's taking place between the head and this higher spiritual reality. And so the head for the Mesoamerican was actually considered the tonal, the waking state. And at night it would go into the stomach and the midnight sun would come out, the nawal. And there'd be this exchange, just like the exchange or the cycle between the moon and the sun. It was a daily cycle, an interplay of the moon and the sun, and the interplay expressing creation in general. And so this shouldn't be viewed upon as a physical death, but actually a death to the profane, limited faculties of our cerebral intelligence. Even Schwaller himself says that, accordingly, there are many revisions to be brought to our judgments regarding the ancient people of only whom traces remain, such as the Maya and the Inca. Let us think outside the box. If we were to reestablish this broken mystery tradition, how would we go about doing that? So, some years back, I was contacted and contracted by the Grand Master of the Rosicrucian Order, Amorc, to produce an episodic film series accentuating the heritage and importance of the mystery schools which make up the Rosicrucian tradition. I was given quite a bit of creative control, and during that process I was given access to the archives in their staff research library in San Jose. And there I came across the work of a little-known Belgian Egyptologist and Rosicrucian by the name of Max Guillemot. Now, Mr. Guillemot was able to, by using the Leiden papyrus, which is on display in the Leiden Museum, and fragmentary coffin texts, Mr. Guillemot was able to reconstruct the initiatory drama, the initiatory process that actually took place at ancient Abydos in the ancient world. But if we were to do something like this for the Maya, how do we go about reconstructing, can we find an unbroken line? How do we go about reconstructing the Maya mystery traditions? Well, we have our usual list of suspects. You have murals, stone stelae or stone monuments, or stela stelae. You have decorative vases. You have pre-Hispanic surviving documents. This one in particular, by the way, is actually the Grolier Codex, which was featured in the Grolier Club in New York on display for quite some time and considered to be a forgery. It wasn't until a few years ago that the Mexican authorities determined that it's actually not only authentic, but it's the oldest surviving pre-Hispanic document we have. And then, of course, there's ethnocultural sources. So my wife and I lead tours to the Yucatan. We lead tours all over the world, but we do our community adventure and symbolist tours to the Yucatan every year. And there, we don't only take the typical tourist route. Of course, we see Chichen Itza and Ekbalam and all the major sites, but we also go off the beaten path. In fact, in some cases, we go on private land where there's enormous complexes. It is mind-boggling how many temples and pyramids are actually in the Yucatan, far more than Egypt. And during these trips, we go through the Maya village of Jul. Jul in the Maya language means the end. And so we would get off the bus, and we take time. We take time out to connect with the local people. And we're invited into their homes. We're very much welcome. And there you'll see some of the elders weaving together their textiles. Traditions are deeply woven in. And we'll ask them, what does this mean? What are these patterns? What are the colors? And they'll tell you. These colors are attributed to the cardinal directions. These colors are attributed to different scientific processes of corn. They very much know their tradition. It's been deeply seated in since antiquity. And of course, we could do cultural comparisons. We could take ancient Egypt, where the mystery schools are rooted, side by side with the Maya traditions. And of course, we could look at the existing mystery schools and do a comparative analysis with the mystery traditions of the Mesoamerican. In fact, I include over 40 of these in my forthcoming book, tentatively titled Water Wizards. We're not going to have time to get into them all today, but why don't we do a few for now? We can start with, let's say, we'll do the Maya vase. A leading authority on scholarship among the Maya would be Michael Coe. He informs us that the Maya scribes, the scribes of the Maya, had supernatural patron deities. And the inventor of writing is considered to be Itzamna. In ancient Egypt, the inventor of writing was the master of eight, the scribe of all scribes, the great initiator, the cosmic principle of wisdom, Jehuti or Tehuti, depending what school of thought you subscribe to, more commonly known by the Greek corruption, Thoth. He was the inventor of writing, always equipped with a reed and papyrus, human form with the head of an ibis, but he also took on the form of a baboon. Now this is interesting, considering the Maya also had a supernatural patron deity scribe that was a baboon or a monkey. And so, in fact, in the later periods of ancient Egypt, the Ptolemaic period, this is a mummified version of Thoth on display in the Egyptian Museum in San Jose. Despite the realistic features, how realistic this looks, in 2002, Nat Geo did an X-ray and actually determined that it was just a vase inside. The reason for this is because in the Ptolemaic period of Egypt, animal mummifications became so widespread that the animal farms started to become depleted. In fact, some of the priests got together and decided that, like Egyptian art, an image alone would suffice. So sometimes they would just use a single bone and mummify it. And spiritual pilgrims would come and pay for a donation to make a donation to the temple to Thoth. Until it got so bad that, eventually they just started creating these forgeries. This is an example of that, where you have the vase inside. But what I want to call your attention to is, notice the posture here. Here, let's see. This is the traditional posture of the seated scribe. We find the same position among the human Egyptian scribe. It is a symbol of doing the work. And so we also find the same among the Maya scribe, the Powhatan. In fact, there's many parallels that have been established by scholars that demonstrate there's a number of parallels between the Maya and the Egyptian scribes. Again, too many to go through today, but one that really stands out for me is this tradition of Intili Telapali, which comes from central Mexico, from the esoteric Toltec tradition. In fact, the Toltec referred to the Maya as the land of Intili Telapali. Intili Telapali was the red ink and the black ink. They referred to the Maya this way because the Maya used red and black ink in their sacred books, their codices. But this Toltec tradition, the Toltecs for quite some time were considered a people. However, recent studies and indigenous traditions posit that the Toltec were not actually a people, but that they were a degree of consciousness. The Toltecs were actually sons of the elite, initiates that had this esoteric tradition. They were artisans and warriors, and later they fused with the Maya to produce Chichen Itza. But they had this tradition of Intili Telapali, the red ink and the black ink. And so for the Toltec, it wasn't just about, the aesthetics of red and black ink. It was about the essence and origin. You see the pigments and dyes came from various insects and plants. Some of those plants came from their sacred cenotes, which a cenote is essentially dilapidated bedrock where the water levels of the earth rise and they form this pool, which was venerated to the Mesoamerica. The Maya called it Xilbalba. As well as in caves, some of these plants would actually come out of the caves, which was also considered Xilbalba, a place of fear, but also a place that was highly venerated because it was considered the primordial womb from which all creation came. So it's like take for example, the color red. It's taking the color red right from creation itself and putting it onto their texts. It had a deeper esoteric understanding. We're just looking at things for its aesthetic purposes. They had the sacred science. And so it becomes interesting that, and actually this could be considered magic. Not magic in the sense of conjuring, but sympathetic magic. For the Toltec, this had a high importance. And it's interesting because George Hart, author of the Dictionary of Egyptian Gods and Goddesses, informs us how for the Egyptian, the palette, which contained their red and black ink and their pens, became a symbol of their expertise. So here we have it. Two cultures, two civilizations, oceans apart. Both have a glyphic language which reads right to left, left to right, top to bottom. Both have human scribes which have supernatural patron deity. This is Sean letting me know that I'm doing such an amazing job. CPAK is giving me 35-minute bonus time. Thank you. But I'm going to try to get it done in 10 minutes because I want to be respectful to the timeline. So we have, it was a symbol of expertise in both cultures. Let us quickly look at the Pythagorean mystery school. Pythagoras, who we all know and love, though we never found his bones, we don't even know if he exists. But what does exist is the influence that he's left on the Western world. He's influenced the hearts of many philosophers who allegedly claim to be initiates of the Pythagorean mystery school. He also influenced the Western world at large. We've all had the Pythagorean triangle and Pythagorean theorem in our classrooms, right? What's interesting is that candidates petitioning for initiation had to undergo 5 years of silence before becoming an initiate. Imagine that. When's the last time any of us have spent more than 5 hours in complete silence? And I'm not talking about in a sleeping state, and this goes without texting or emailing. In fact, why don't we have a show of hands? Raise your hands if you've ever spent 5 hours or more observing complete silence. Keep them up. Okay? How about 5 days? Okay, I see we have some lonely people in this room. All right, so for those of us who have spent a significant amount of time observing silence, you know what sort of physiological and psychological effects it can have on the human condition. Thus, it becomes obvious or appropriate why Pythagoras would want the initiates to undergo such an ordeal before receiving gnosis, this specialized knowledge. So what was it that was so important in the Pythagorean mystery schools that we would have to wait 5 years observing silence before receiving the teaching? What were they teaching? Well, we know the lessons were taught in degrees. And one of the things they taught about was relationships. Not the relationships between you and your friends or your significant other or audience and the speaker, but relationships between humankind and nature and the cosmos and the metaphysical makeup of our matrix of reality. More importantly, their connection to number. Oops. Botched that one up. Okay, so Hector M. Calderon, author of the Mathematical Science of the Maya, informs us that the Maya identified the cosmos and created a school of philosophy based on the symbolism of numbers many centuries before Hermes Trismegistus or Pythagoras, and I propose we can find an example of that number symbolism in Mexico, in the Yucatan, at the ancient sacred site of Uxmal. Here we have the magician's pyramid, and just over that dense vegetation we can find an example of number symbolism encoded in didactic architecture in this Nunnery Complex. Shall we take a look at the Nunnery Complex? No, not that Nunnery Complex. Or that one. The Nunnery Quadrangle, dubbed that by the Spanish, who assumed these structures were arbitrary and they thought they looked like nuns' houses or convents back in Spain. However, keep in mind the words of Christian Rabis, who tells us mystery schools were both monasteries and universities, or Peter Tompkins' idea of cosmic universities. That's exactly what this is. This structure is a cosmic university, which actually encodes the Maya's cosmology. Let me show you how I discovered this. So here we are standing in the center of the Nunnery Quadrangle, south facing north. If we turn our attention to the eastern structure, we have, let us count, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 structures. 5. In Pythagorean number mysticism, it was the number of love. Why? Because it was the first time the female number 2 married the male number 3 to create this new union. However, my mentor, John Anthony West, said that it would be more appropriate, because love has so many connotations, that we call it the number of potentiality. And of course, in the Egyptian mythology, Horus is attributed to the number 5, Horus being the principle of return to source, which is appropriate considering Horus on the horizon is where the sun rises in the east, the zenith goes overhead to set in the west. But notice in the western structure, we have 7 entrances. Now that's strange. It's quite odd considering the Maya's affinity for symmetry as expressed here with the dual-headed serpents and the dual-headed jaguar with its intertwined tail, which is on the northern facade. You see, the Maya did everything with a balance of opposites, and the Maya did nothing haphazardly. Everything was done with intention. So why 5 in the east and 7 in the west, which is similar to what we find at the Temple of Edfu when we look through the view of number symbolism? You know, there's probably 7,007,777 correspondences for the number 7. We have 7 days of the week, 7 visible colors on a scale, 7 colors of the rainbow, 7 chakras, 7 major psychic centers. Interestingly enough, on this western wall, where we have the 7 entrances, we find the Kukulkan serpent. You see him here swallowing the head of a human. And of course, the serpent is often attributed to Kundalini energy, which is attributed to the chakras. And what's interesting is it actually has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 partitions. And then the tail wraps around, and there's 7 segments to the rattle as well. The serpent was a symbol for many things, one of them being regeneration, the regenerative principle, new process. And so 7 is the number of process. And so it becomes appropriate that 5 is the number in the east where the sun rises, and 7 is where it sets or where it goes to die. And I only say die, not in the Western convention. You see, because in the esoteric tradition, it's understood that death is the greatest initiation of all, because it's a new beginning. We have nothing to fear. Drop your fear of death. There's a cycle. There's always cycles in everything. Isn't that why we're here? And so what's interesting is that, okay, so I get it, right? This is reasonable to conjecture. 5, 7, what's this guy talking about numbers? But where it really becomes evident is when we look at the lower register. We have 4 entrances on each side, giving us a total of 8, with 1 in the middle, which makes 9. Number of the underworld for the Maya, 9 phases of the moon, 9 months of human gestation. The Maya had this concept of the underworld, Shilbalba, where they had even 9 principles or deities ascribed to the 9 levels of the underworld. This is the Maya's cosmology. They had this real spatial awareness. They viewed the world in 3 tiers. The world it was a quadrangle, but their understanding of that space was done in 3 tiers, where you had the underworld, Shilbalba, the middle plane in which we dwell, Kumu Ukab, which is actually a quincunx. You have the 4-corner universe, and they had their sacred tree, their axis mundi in the middle. It was the Yakshe in the physical manifestation, also their Wakakan tree, which they considered its roots, its 9 roots to go into the underworld and absorb the sap, the eats, and it would come up through the tree, through the 13 branches that extended into the Maya upper world, Mu'ukab. And there you have your 13 levels of the upper world. So if we are on track here, if my hypothesis is correct, then we should find 13 entrances in the north. Let's count them. Oh, we only have 11, so I have failed you. Time to pack my bags and go home. But you know, it wasn't until I actually climbed up these stairs and went around to the side that I noticed another entrance. and which gave us 12, and on the opposing side, another one, which gives us a total of 13. 13 levels of the upper world. Okay, so this is the Maya's cosmology, encoded in the structure itself. The mystery school, it wasn't necessarily an oral teaching, it was didactic architecture. The cosmology was encoded in the structure, and there's many other correspondences here. I could spend an hour on this alone. We don't have time. You can always come to Mexico with me. But here we have, where it really gets interesting is what I discovered is if you actually go through the south, that is to say, go back through the womb, through creation, we come to the Mesoamerican ball court, where they played the game known to the Mayas, poke the poke. And it is the ball court with its two flanking sides. The symbol for it looks like a Chicana cross, if everyone knows what that looks like. It was actually called home to the Maya, and that is the word for crevice, where you have these two flanking sides, which lines up with what we find in the Popol Vuh, where the grain god, Hunahpu, is born from a turtle shell. That's exactly what the ball court is expressing. It's the duality. The one becomes the two. It's the act of creation itself from which the corn and the regenerative principle rises, all creation. And so, where it really gets interesting is this inconspicuous structure here, which is up on a mound. It's up on a hill. Now, the archaeologists are still struggling to find out its functionality. They have no idea what purpose this building served. Take notice of the triptych doorway. They call this the House of Turtles because these cute turtles wrap around the whole structure. Turtle being a symbol of longevity, of protection, of balance. Its 13 shells line up with the 13 months of the Maya calendar. And of course, in all native or indigenous traditions of America, or many of them, we have Turtle Island, the primordial mound from which all creation rose. And again, it's interesting that this structure is on a mound. Now, if we were to take the Nunnery Quadrangle, the ball court, and the House of Turtles, if we take this triad and we place them on a grid aligned with the cardinal directions, they're just 9 degrees clockwise of the cardinal directions, which is a departure from the central structure at Uxmal, known as the Governor's Palace, which is actually skewed from that grid just under 20 degrees in order to align with Venus. So we know the Governor's Palace is intentionally aligned with Venus. Why is it that these other structures are significantly different and skew from that grid? These sort of inexactitudes suggest that something metaphysical is happening here. And so it becomes appropriate, it's reasonable to conjecture that up here on the hill, and we know that the shamanic rulers and the high initiates and the king were the only ones that could gain access to the top of the mound, the top of the hill, or the top of the pyramid, which is inspired by these natural landscapes. This is where the shamanic ruler would take the initiate to look through the triptych door, to look through creation itself, to develop a deeper understanding for the Maya's cosmology and the world around them. This is didactic architecture. This is not merely aesthetic. It's not an arbitrary structure. If we put on the esoteric lens and look through the view of Pythagorean number mysticism, looking at the House of Turtles, is the one. The one becomes the two, and thus the many. You see, it's what Schwaller, the one is before creation. It's the absolute. It's undifferentiated consciousness before it becomes conscious of itself in a split. That split, Schwaller-de-Lubitz referred to as the primordial scission. It's the one becoming the two. It's the act of creation, which the corn god that gives sustenance. And of course, this all happens on a metaphysical level before we reach the manifested universe, which is always represented by the number 4, our material universe, material world, the physical world. So the one becomes the two. You can't have two unless you account for a relationship. There has to be a relationship. This is all stuff I learned from John Anthony West in a remarkable chapter he wrote entitled Pythagoras Rides Again and Serpent in the Sky. It's a great primer on Pythagorean number mysticism, and it was very helpful in decoding the sacred science among the Maya. And so you have the structure, the one becomes a two, and eventually we have the, okay. So I'm gonna fly through this. I got a few things here, 2 more minutes. The Orphic mystery tradition, don't have time to get into it, but they centered on the practice of purification. Here we have the Orphic egg enshrined by the serpent, denoting sacred space. Sacred space needs to be purified in order to represent the place of creation. And at Ekbalam, which predates Chichen Itza, we find these ritual baths. Just like in Egypt, the priest would have to go into this ritual pool and bathe before going into the temple. Same among the Maya. We have them at Chichen Itza, we have them here at Ekbalam. This one, interestingly enough, from an aerial view, looks like a stylized Ankh. And it's sitting directly across from the Acropolis at Ekbalam, which is one of the tallest structures in the Yucatan, towering over the tree line. The initiates would have to go through this ritual of purification before getting access up the stairs. Why? Well, I want to draw your attention. We're going to go here, actually, under this thatched roof. Here I stand for scale beside the Western Serpent balustrade, looking at the glyphs. This is actually a serpent with a dual tongue. Here's the two glyphs for the dual tongue. This is the roof of the mouth of the serpent. You have the teeth, the palate, and the tongue. And all of this is the extended tongue. This is esoteric in itself. It's from the mouth of the serpent. In other words, from the mouth of wisdom. And so, what's it saying in these glyphs? Does anybody here read Maya glyphs or know the Maya language? A little bit? Good, maybe you can help me if I botch this up. So here's an illustration. This is the arrival glyph, and it reads, Ke'ina yutli wina, ushkaba yeba kalumte, ukiti kon lektok, Ka'u talo ahau Iowa. Okay, so essentially in English, what it's saying is that this is the arrival glyph. For those that are arriving here, these are the steps of the King of all kings, Ukit Khan Lektok, father of four flints, who was the Lord of all lords of the Holy Land of Talol. This is the Ekbalam glyph. The archaeologists call it that because they borrowed from the Maya language. Ek in the Maya language means star or dirt, and Balam means jaguar, so it's star or dirt jaguar. However, this is the Holy Land of Talol, so the actual original ancient name of Ekbalam, the whole area, was Talol, and it's saying that Ukit Khan Lektok was not just the king, but the holy king of all Talol. This here is the closing glyph, and it's the side profile with the tongue extended as to say, so it says. All this information before, you could consider it like a pyramid, or more appropriately, like we say in the esoteric tradition, so mote it be. Precisely, yes, exactly. So here we have, let's go back. Here we have an overview of Ekbalam. And I'll ask you guys just reserve questions because I only have a few minutes left and I want to get these last slides off. I'll be happy to answer all questions later. This is the aerial view of Ekbalam. We actually made a discovery here during one of our community adventures a few years back. Let me go to the next slide. Well, actually, let me show you this just so I can give you some context. What I noticed when I first started going to Ekbalam is these unusual shim stones in the core masonry. And during one of our trips a few years back, we noticed a pattern. It went and it truncated near the entrance. Then one of my guests noticed it actually continued. And another guest noticed, and before you know it, we're all tripping over one another going around the whole structure until we realized it wrapped around the whole thing. Here's an example of that. I'll highlight these so you can see this unusual pattern. Now, one of the guests had suggested that, well, maybe this is where the Maya Masons, left a signature to continue building. I'm not sure that's the case because the Maya, again, did nothing haphazardly. Everything was done with intention. So there must be some sort of symbolic purpose for this serpent-like pattern. Here we see another example of it. The stones are very distinct in size. At Ekbalam, there's actually the map that they give to tourists. They leave off this section, which is a ritual plaza. I like to take our groups off the beaten path and go show them this. And just last year, during our community adventure and study trip, I noticed that I found it again. And I'm trying to still work on figuring out what it is. I've been counting the stones. Could it be perhaps a star map? I don't know. We can leave it up for some bright scholar to come into code, perhaps a PhD study, maybe not for me. But what I did find is that the head truncated in a larger stone. It looks like the head of a serpent. And why is that? Again, serpents denote sacred space. What is all of this symbolizing? It is that this is one of the most sacred spaces at Ekbalam because it was the tomb of Ukit-Kan-Lektak. Here we have the monster mask. You have 3 tiers. Again, I could spend an hour giving a dissertation on the details of the symbolism here alone, but you have the 3 levels expressed. This was actually just recently excavated in the last 20 years. It was in the 90s. An archaeologist stumbled upon the head up here, and they started to remove all the dirt and found this beautifully preserved stucco unlike anything else in the Maya world. Notice the jaw, the mouth, the nose, the eyes of the Wheats monster. And so if you ask the local Maya, they'll, actually up here, you have what's considered to be Ukit-Kan-Lektak. We don't know for certain, and they think this may be his wife. And look how she's holding the eyelid with her shoulder. And over here, you have a figure in a seated position, almost like a meditative pose, again, holding the eyelid. Why is that? It's because it's believed if the eyes were to close, the monster would fall asleep, and if the monster fell asleep, the jaw would close, thus it would prevent access to the underworld, where we have Ukit-Kan-Lektak. And so to wrap up, I just want to draw your attention about this emphasis on the eyes, because the Maya understood the principle that all forms of matter are derived from a single source of energy. In other words, this is objective art. We look at it subjectively. Maybe it's grotesque, maybe it's beautiful, but we're looking at it from our point of view. How often do we put ourselves in its position and look at it from the eyes of the monster looking back on this audience? To wrap up, Eduardo Verreris says that all beings attributed a point of view will be a subject, and this is at the core of the mystery school teachings. It's the acceptance of opposites we find in all spiritual traditions. Love thy neighbor. Giving opposition its due is one of the most difficult things we can put into practice, right? But this becomes very practical because if you were to put yourself in the position of one of these people, the male or the female, the next time you have a conversation with someone, try taking your attention, not focus so much on the person anymore, but out of yourself, and place your attention at an adequate distance, in real time, an unbiased observing spectator where you can gain control over your emotions, your tonality, your pace, your breathing. So one who understands the law 3 is not easily seduced by dogmatism, and John tells us that it is the heart, not the head, that understands the law 3. So to finally wrap up, I'd like to conclude in saying that the Maya did have these mystery schools, and they actually had their own complete orders in varying degrees. They had the Order of the Jaguar and the Order of the Eagle. The Order of the Eagle was the first to swoop into battle. The Jaguar warriors would be right behind them with the clubs. There's a beautiful juxtaposition that's taken place here. This is taken from Chichen Itza. You have the jaguar, an animal of the land attributed to the night because it could see through the night, and of course the eagle. Wings always symbolizes, in the symbolist approach, it's always attributed to spirituality. Essentially, what's being represented here is cosmic intelligence. And notice the central theme. What's between the paws of the jaguar and what's between the talon of the eagle? It is the heart. And that is because the heart was at the center of the Mesoamerican mystery traditions. The heart, the vitality, they knew that it was through the heart we could best understand true wisdom. And so we've talked a lot about ancient knowledge, a lot of heady stuff at this conference, but I want to leave you in a heart space. So we're going to take a final minute to lead you through a practical application. All that's required is your attention. And what I'd like for you to do is take your attention from your head and shift it into the body. Feel your heart center. Feel from your heart. Anchor it into your feet. And you could take on a Tibetan technique and go ahead and move your foot around, wiggle your toes. Become conscious from your foot. Essentially, we want to avoid the monkey mind chatter and create a more whole body awareness anchored in the foot. And I want you to sustain your consciousness there as I read this last passage. The first 4 senses pass through the brain. The 5th sense, hearing, passes through the heart without speaking directly to the brain. It is the spiritual sense, the door to intelligence of the heart. My name is Anyextee. I lead tours to Mexico, Egypt, Turkey, and sacred spaces all over the world. I have a book coming out. You can learn more at anyextee.com, depthexpeditions.com, Esoteric Archaeology, and Ancient Egypt Mystery Schools. Thank you.
Thank you.